The Ulari Dominion had not lost a war in 4,000 years. Commander Vexel Lorask intended to keep that record intact when he led the 9th Subjugation Fleet into the unremarkable system designated Sol, 7 by Dominion cartographers. The natives called it something else, something shorter, something almost insultingly plain. Earth. Vexel had reduced glittering crystal cities on Tarvasai to ash. He had broken the void fleets of the Karate in a single afternoon. He had stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Unbroken Verdict, while 17 species surrendered to him in person, kneeling on decks slick with their own ichor. He was not a man given to fear or to surprise. The Dominion's military doctrine had been refined over 112 centuries, every variable accounted for, every contingency drilled into officers from birth. War, to the Ulari, was a science as exact as orbital mechanics. So when the fleet censors flagged 12 human vessels rising to meet 60 Dominion warships, Vexel did not feel concern. He felt something closer to pity. The human ships were absurd, cobbled together from mismatched hull plating, bristling with weapons that didn't match any known design language, broadcasting on frequencies that seemed almost deliberately chosen for maximum annoyance rather than tactical advantage. One vessel was, according to his censor officer, blaring music. Loud, percussive, utterly without military purpose. Composition analysis? Vexel asked, unknown commander. The translation matrix suggests it is called classic rock. Vexel said nothing. He gave the order to advance. What happened next would be replayed in his mind for the rest of his life, dissected frame by frame, and still never fully understood. The human ships didn't form up. They didn't adopt any defensive posture as tactical, computer recognized. Instead, they scattered, not randomly, but in a pattern so erratic that its targeting systems, designed to predict enemy maneuvers based on millennia of combat data, simply failed to converge on a solution. 3 ships peeled away and seemed to flee. Vexel's instinct, honed by 100 campaigns, told him this was a trap, a lure toward an ambush. He was wrong. There was no ambush. The ships were simply fleeing, and then, having fled, turning around for no discernible reason and charging straight back into the heart of his formation, weapons blazing at point-blank range, close enough that his own ship's defensive grids couldn't fire without risking friendly damage. It should not have worked. By every metric the Dominion possessed, it should not have worked. It worked. Within 40 minutes, Vexel had lost 11 ships. The humans had lost 2, and one of those, his censor officer reported with a kind of stunned disbelief, appeared to have been deliberately destroyed by its own crew after they'd finished venting all of its torpedoes into a Dominion cruiser, ejecting in escape pods while broadcasting what the translation matrix rendered as worth it. Vexel ordered the retreat. It was the first retreat of his career. He sat alone in his quarters that night, replaying the battle data over and over, searching for the pattern, the underlying strategic logic that had to be there. Dominion doctrine insisted that all warfare, however chaotic it appeared on the surface, resolved to predictable optimization. Once you understood the variables, there had to be a key, a code, something that, once cracked, would reveal the human's victories as the product of cold calculation after all. He found nothing. Worse than nothing. He found contradictions. Tactics that worked in one engagement were abandoned in the next for no apparent reason. Ships that should have retreated pressed forward. Ships that should have pressed forward retreated. A pattern of patternlessness, if such a thing could exist. When he submitted his report to Dominion High Command, he tried to convey this. He used words like unpredictability as doctrine and chaos as a weapon system. He requested additional fleet allocations and a full tactical reassessment of the species designation human. The response took 6 days to arrive. When it did, it was not what he expected. It was a transcript of laughter. His own field report, it turned out, had been circulated, not through proper military channels, but through the Dominion's vast entertainment networks, repackaged as comedic commentary. Commander Vexel's concession speech, one program had titled it. Citizens across 1,000 worlds were tuning in to laugh at the absurd, cowardly, music-blaring monkeys who had apparently terrified one of the Dominion's most decorated officers. Vexel stared at the broadcast feed for a long time before switching it off. He did not laugh. 3 months later, Vexel stood before a closed session of the Alari Strategic Council. 7 aging admirals who had not personally commanded a vessel in decades and tried, for the second time, to explain that the Dominion was facing an extinction-level threat disguised as a punchline. "Show them the Cassandra engagement," he said to his aide, and the holographic display flickered to life above the council table. The Battle of Cassandra Reach had become, in Dominion military circles, a kind of dark joke in its own right. A standard patrol fleet of 15 ships had encountered a single human vessel, just one, running what looked on paper like a deeply unwise solo intercept course. The Dominion fleet commander, eager to claim an easy kill and perhaps redeem the Ninth Fleet's earlier humiliation, had ordered a full encirclement. The human ship had powered down its engines and drifted, apparently disabled. "A trick," the fleet commander had announced over the comm, smug certainty in every syllable. "They want us to think they're crippled, so we approach carelessly. We will not fall for it." So instead of approaching carelessly, the Dominion ships had approached with extreme caution, weapons charged, maintaining maximum standoff distance, treating the drifting vessel as if it were a bomb. It was a bomb, but not the kind they expected. The human ship had been broadcasting a distress signal the entire time, a real one, as it turned out, requesting rescue from a malfunction that did not exist. And while 14 Dominion warships spent 40 minutes triangulating, scanning, and second-guessing a target that posed no actual threat, an entirely different human formation, 6 ships that had been running silent in the system's asteroid field for 2 full days, waiting, struck the Dominion supply convoy 3 systems away, a convoy that had been left lightly defended because its escort had been redirected to reinforce the very fleet now staring suspiciously at a drifting decoy. "They sacrificed 1 ship's worth of credibility," Vexel said to the council, "to misdirect 15 others for 40 critical minutes. The decoy vessel was never in danger. It was bait, and we obligingly chewed on it for the better part of an hour, while they took everything we actually needed." Admiral Kursk, the eldest of the 7, steepled his fingers. "Commander, you are describing an elaborate deception. Deceptions are a known category of warfare. We have countermeasures. With respect, Admiral, I am describing something else. I am describing an enemy who is willing to let one of their own ships look stupid, be mocked, even in their own media. I have intercepted their broadcasts, purely so that we will misjudge them. They don't fear looking foolish. We do. That asymmetry is the weapon. You are saying their incompetence is competence. I am saying they have no use of distinction. We assume a rational actor minimizes embarrassment and maximizes the appearance of strength. They have discarded that assumption entirely, and it makes them unreadable to every targeting doctrine we possess." There was a silence. Then Admiral Kursk did something Vexel had not anticipated. He smiled. "Commander Vexel, your analysis is creative. I will admit, the Council finds your reports consistently entertaining. There is talk of commissioning a dramatization." Vexel felt something cold settle into his chest. A dramatization. The public morale benefits are significant. Citizens enjoy stories of human folly. It reminds them of Dominion superiority during uncertain times. "Admiral, I am trying to tell you that uncertain times is precisely what we are entering, and that every joke you make at their expense is being paid for in supply convoys and Alari lives." Kursk's smile did not waver. "Your concern is noted, Commander. You may return to your fleet." Vexel left the chamber knowing, with the same cold certainty that had once guided him through 100 successful campaigns, that he had just watched the civilization choose comfort over survival. He did not yet know how thoroughly that choice would be punished. What he did know was this. Somewhere out among the stars, humans were watching the Dominion laugh, cataloging every dismissive broadcast, every comedic retelling of human incompetence, and filing away as something far more valuable than any captured warship. Intelligence. Intelligence. They were learning exactly how predictable the Dominion's contempt made it. The propaganda show was called Monkey Business in the Void, and against every instinct Vexel possessed, he forced himself to watch the premiere. It was, he had to admit, well-produced, bright colors, exaggerated alien caricatures meant to represent humans, oversized grins, comically oversized weapons, pratfall score to comedic music. Each episode dramatized a real engagement, twisted into farce. The Battle of Cassandra Reach became a slapstick sequence where bumbling humans accidentally stumbled into a supply convoy while Dominion officers wrung their hands over a deflated weather balloon. Audiences across 1,000 worlds loved it. Approval ratings for the war effort, which had dipped after the Ninth Fleet's losses became public, rebounded sharply. Vexel understood, watching it, that the Dominion was no longer simply underestimating the enemy. It was actively training its own population to underestimate them, building an entire cultural immune response against taking humanity seriously. Every joke was now a small act of self-sabotage, repeated nightly across 1,000 worlds with state funding. He requested reassignment to active frontline command rather than a desk analyzing reports no one read. The Council, perhaps eager to be rid of him, granted it without comment. His new posting put him in command of a reconstituted Ninth Fleet, rebuilt and reinforced, tasked with retaking contested systems along what Dominion strategists call the threshold, the boundary region where human and Alari territory bled into each other. It was here, over the following year, that Vexel began to see the shape of the thing in full. It wasn't just battlefield chaos. It was systemic. Human supply lines made no logical sense, and yet never failed when it mattered. Human command structures seemed to delegate authority to absurdly junior officers in critical moments, decisions that Dominion doctrine would have escalated through 6 layers of review. Human ships disobeyed orders mid-battle. Vexel intercepted calm chatter of a captain flatly refusing a direct command from a superior and somehow being right to do so, the deviation leading to a tactical opportunity the original order would have missed entirely. He began compiling a new kind of report, not a warning about specific tactics. Those would only be deployed once. Instead, he tried to document the underlying philosophy, the operating principle beneath the noise. The Dominion treats predictability as strength, he wrote. We optimize for repeatable success, for doctrine that can be taught, drilled, and trusted. This makes us formidable against any enemy who plays by recognizable rules of warfare, however different from our own. Humanity does not appear to play by rules of warfare at all. They improvise at every level, from grand strategy to a single gunner's decision to fire early. Crucially, this improvisation is not random. It responds instantly to the specific moment in ways no doctrine can anticipate because the doctrine itself does not exist in a form we would recognize. They have built an entire military culture around having no fixed culture. It is, in effect, anti-doctrine. And anti-doctrine cannot be defeated by better doctrine. It can only be matched by an opponent willing to abandon doctrine entirely, a path the Dominion, by its nature, cannot take. He sent this report through every channel available to him: military command, the intelligence directorate, and, against his better judgment but out of sheer desperation, directly to the office of the High Council itself. The military command thanked him for his ongoing contribution to morale programming. The intelligence directorate filed it under speculative, low priority. The High Council's office sent no response at all, though 3 weeks later Vexel learned that a new season of Monkey Business in the Void had begun production, this time featuring an admiral character whose stern warnings about anti-doctrine were played in every episode for laughs, a thinly veiled and instantly recognizable caricature of Vexel himself. His own warnings had become the joke's punchline. He had been turned, without his consent, into the show's resident Cassandra, the alarmist nobody needed to listen to, because the narrative had already decided he was wrong. Somewhere in human space, Vexel was certain someone was watching that broadcast too, and taking very careful notes. The siege of Ashland Station was supposed to be the Dominion's answer to 2 years of humiliation. Vexel had argued, in private briefings, against the operation's premise from the start. Dominion High Command had assembled the largest fleet deployed since the Karate pacification: 200 warships, 3 full legions of ground troops, an orbital bombardment array capable of glassing a continent. The target was Ashland, a mid-sized human shipyard and logistics hub considered critical to their war effort. The plan was simple: overwhelming force applied to a fixed point, the kind of engagement Dominion doctrine excelled at. No room for clever misdirection, no asymmetric trickery, just an avalanche of firepower against a target that could not run. This is precisely the engagement where our strengths matter. The Fleet Supreme Commander, Admiral Threll, told Vexel during final preparations, they cannot improvise their way out of overwhelming mass. A station cannot dodge. Vexel did not disagree with the logic. He simply distrusted any plan that assumed the humans would fight the battle the Dominion had designed for them. They know we're coming, he said. They've known for weeks. Ask yourself why a target this valuable hasn't been more heavily reinforced. Because they cannot spare the ships. We have stretched them thin along 3 fronts simultaneously. This is the opportunity that wins us the war. Commander, I'd have thought you, of all people, would want that. I want us to survive contact with them. Those are not always the same goal. Threll laughed, not unkindly, but with the easy confidence of a man who had clearly watched a few too many episodes of a certain propaganda program. You spent too long staring at monkeys, Vexel. Take the rear guard. Let the front lines remind you what real Dominion strength looks like. Vexel did not argue further. He had learned by then exactly how far argument could carry him. The assault began on schedule. The Dominion fleet advanced on Ashland Station in a textbook formation, bombardment arrays charging, ground transports queued behind the warship screen. Human defensive fire was, as predicted, hopelessly inadequate against such numbers. A handful of orbital defense platforms, a token fighter screen, nothing that should have slowed 200 warships by more than an hour. It took 6 hours. By the 4th, Vexel, watching from the rear guard exactly as ordered, understood why. The station's defenders weren't trying to win the battle. They were running a clock. Every defensive position, every fighter sortie, every desperate, seemingly doomed counterattack bought minutes. And minutes were apparently all that mattered, because the real engagement wasn't happening at Ashland at all. It was happening everywhere else. While 200 Dominion warships, nearly a third of the Threshold fleet's total strength, committed to a grinding, expensive assault on a target the humans had apparently decided, well in advance, was not worth defending to the last ship, 17 separate human strike forces hit every lightly defended Dominion position along the entire front simultaneously. Supply depots, communication relays, 3 shipyards of their own, undefended because their garrisons had been pulled to reinforce the decisive Ashland counteroffensive that never came. A Dominion fleet command post, hit by a strike force small enough that it shouldn't have been able to punch through, succeeding only because every nearby reserve had been redirected toward the glamorous, doctrine-approved siege everyone had assumed was where the real war was being fought. Ashland Station fell. Admiral Threll broadcast his victory declaration with evident pride. By the time anyone in Dominion Command connected the dawn-to-dusk timeline of 17 simultaneous strikes to the 6-hour delay at Ashland, the damage was total. The Threshold front had effectively collapsed in a single day. And the cruelest part, the part that kept Vexel awake long after the after-action report were filed, was that there had been no trap to find, no decoded message, no clever ruse waiting to be unraveled by a sufficiently clever analyst. The humans had simply done the obvious, costly, correct thing, sacrifice an indefensible asset to buy time, then spend that time hitting everything the enemy had left exposed in their hurry to celebrate. And the Dominion's confidence in its own superiority had made that obvious move invisible to them until it was finished. Threll's victory broadcast was still playing on Dominion Entertainment networks, edited with triumphant music, when the casualty reports from 17 other systems started arriving. Nobody made a comedy episode about that day. For the first time, the laughter stopped. It did not start again. Not because the Council had finally listened to Vexel, because there was, for the first time, nothing left in the Threshold sector to laugh about. In the aftermath of Ashland, Vexel was finally given what he had spent 2 years requesting, an audience with a full High Council, unfiltered, broadcast live across every Dominion world. Not because they believe him now, because they were desperate, and a desperate council will reach for anyone who claims to have an answer, even a man they had spent 2 seasons mocking on state television. He stood in the central chamber of the council spire, looking out at 7 faces that had aged visibly in the months since Ashland, and at the silent recording drones that would carry his words to every corner of Dominion space, and he understood that this would be the last time anyone listened to him. Whatever he said now, the Dominion would either change or would not, and there would be no third report No third warning, no second chance to make them understand. "You have asked me here," he began, "to explain how to defeat humanity. I will not do that. I do not believe it can be done with the tools this council currently possesses, and I think by now some of you suspect the same thing, which is why I am finally in this room." A murmur ran through the gallery. Admiral Kursk, looking considerably less amused than he had 2 years prior, raised a hand for silence. "Continue, Commander. For 4,000 years, the Dominion has won wars by being the most disciplined, most predictable, most thoroughly drilled military force in the galaxy. Our enemies could be studied, modeled, and ultimately outplanned because they were rational actors optimizing within recognizable constraints. Territory, resources, survival, pride. We build an empire on the assumption that warfare is, at its core, a solvable problem, and for 4,000 years we were right. Humanity has broken that assumption, not through superior technology, not through superior numbers, but by refusing to be a solvable problem at all. They sacrificed ships we would never sacrifice. They abandoned positions doctrine would call indefensible at the exact moment that abandonment becomes strategically perfect. They let their own forces look foolish, incompetent, even comic, because they have no investment in appearing strong, only in being effective, and they have somehow built an entire culture, an entire species, around treating those two things as unrelated. We laughed at them. I want to be direct about why that was catastrophic, because I do not think this council has fully reckoned with it. Every time we turned a human tactic into comedy, we taught ourselves, collectively, across 1,000 worlds, to dismiss the thing we should have been studying most carefully. We did their reconnaissance for them. We trained our own population, and worse, our own officer corps, to be incapable of taking the enemy seriously at the exact moment seriousness mattered most. Ashvalin did not fall because of brilliant human strategy alone. It fell because 200 Dominion warships were commanded by officers raised on entertainment that told them every night for 2 years that the people defending that station were a joke. He paused. The chamber was utterly silent now. I do not know how to defeat an enemy who has made unpredictability into doctrine, because doctrine by definition is a thing they have discarded. What I can tell you is this. You cannot outplan an opponent who refuses to be planned for, and you cannot mock an opponent into defeat. Every broadcast that called them incompetent made us less prepared, not more. If this council wishes to survive what is coming, it must begin by accepting that there is no version of this war in which Dominion superiority is simply restored by trying harder, building more ships, or drilling our officers more rigorously in the doctrines that have already failed us along the entire threshold. The thing that made us an empire for 4,000 years is the same thing that may end us in the next 4. Admiral Kursk leaned forward. "And if we cannot defeat them, Commander, what would you have us do?" Vexel had asked himself that question for 2 years, through every report, every dismissal, every laughing broadcast. He had no comforting answer, and he had promised himself, walking into this chamber, that he would not manufacture one simply to give the council something palatable. "I would have us stop laughing," he said. "I do not know if that is enough. I suspect it is not. But it is the only thing within this council's power that has not already been tried, and we have very little time left to try anything at all." He stepped back from the podium. No one in the chamber spoke. For the first time in 2 years, no one was smiling either. It would not matter. Even as Vexel finished speaking, sensors across the threshold sector were already registering a pattern of human fleet movements that no one in that chamber, humbled or not, laughing or not, would manage to correctly interpret in time. The humans, it turned out, had been listening to every Dominion broadcast too, including this one. 3 days after Vexel's address, a single human transmission reached every Dominion world simultaneously, broadcast on every frequency the Ulari military used, decrypted as easily as if their codes had been left lying open on a table. There was no demand for surrender, no declaration of war. The war, after all, had been underway for 2 years. There was only a message delivered by a woman in a simple uniform, sitting in what looked like an ordinary command chair, speaking in a tone that was infuriatingly almost gentle. To Commander Vexel and to whoever else in the Dominion Council is finally willing to listen. Thank you. You understood us better than anyone else on your side, and we want you to know that you were right about almost everything. Vexel watched the broadcast from his quarters aboard the rebuilt Ninth Fleet flagship, alone, the way he had watched the very first comedy episode about himself 2 years earlier. You call what we do anti-doctrine, the woman continued. That's close, but we want to correct one thing, because we think it matters. You assumed it was a strategy, something we built deliberately to exploit your weaknesses. It isn't. We didn't invent unpredictability as a weapon against you. We have simply always been like this, disorganized, stubborn, willing to look foolish if it gets the job done, quick to abandon a plan the moment a better one occurs to somebody. Regardless of rank, your civilization built an empire by perfecting consistency. Ours has survived 400 years of its own internal chaos by getting comfortable improvising through disasters of our own making. We did not need to study your doctrine to defeat it. We only needed to keep being exactly what we already are and wait for your confidence to do the rest. She paused, and for a moment something almost like sympathy crossed her face. You spent 2 years trying to find the pattern beneath our chaos, Commander. There isn't one beneath it. The chaos is the whole thing. That's what your council never understood, and what your propaganda made sure no one else would understand either. Every time you turn us into a joke, you made it easier for us to keep doing exactly what we were always going to do anyway, because nobody was watching closely enough to stop us. We didn't trick the Dominion into laughing. The Dominion did that part entirely on its own. We just made sure it cost you everything it could. The broadcast ended there. No follow-up threat. No further explanation. Just silence and the slow, sick understanding spreading across 1,000 Dominion worlds that the war had perhaps never been winnable in the way anyone had imagined, because it had never been the kind of war Dominion doctrine knew how to recognize in the first place. In the months that followed, the Threshold Front did not collapse all at once. Empires rarely die in a single dramatic battle, no matter how the entertainment networks once preferred to tell it. Instead, the Dominion's grip loosened system by system, supply line by supply line, as commanders who had spent 2 years absorbing comedic certainty about human incompetence found themselves, again and again, outmaneuvered by an enemy that simply refused to behave the way 4,000 years of doctrine insisted an enemy should. Some adapted. Most did not. Adapting meant admitting that the foundation of Dominion military philosophy, the belief that war was, in the end, a solvable problem, had been wrong all along, and empires built on certainty rarely survive the admission that their certainty was the weakness. Vexel did not live to see the Dominion's final dissolution. That took decades longer, and was, in the end, as much a product of 1,000 internal failures as of any single human victory. But he lived long enough to see something he had once thought impossible. The propaganda networks quietly canceling monkey business in the void without explanation and never producing anything like it again. He lived long enough to be neither mocked nor celebrated, simply remembered, in a handful of military academies that still bothered to teach history, as the one officer who had seen it coming and had not been able to make anyone care in time. He kept, until the end of his life, a single recording on his personal terminal. The human woman's broadcast, watched perhaps 100 times over the years. He never found the comfort in it that he searched for, but he did, eventually, find something like clarity. The Dominion had spent 4,000 years building the most disciplined, predictable, thoroughly drilled empire the galaxy had ever known, and had been so certain of that discipline that it could not imagine an opponent for whom discipline meant nothing at all. It had laughed at the thing it could not understand, and in laughing, had ensured it would never understand it in time. The greatest joke in the galaxy, Vexel had come to believe, was never about the humans at all. It was about an empire so certain of its own superiority that it mistook its enemy's strangeness for weakness, right up until the moment that strangeness became the last thing it ever saw.